Hello there guys, and welcome back to the channel. Right, so December time to do the rankings, and we have been doing very well so far, not missing a day. This is going to be the 10th day in a row as we are doing these, and we have went over all of the 2022 buffs, new champions, all 6 class rankings, and also top 10 of each class, but the very strongest one. So I don't think that there is much dispute right now that Cosmic class is the best, strongest, most powerful, utilized class in a game. And therefore, obviously, it is extremely difficult to do these rankings with, because there will be a ton of great champions that will unfortunately not make it. I do have a very big disclaimer for spots number 2 to 4. And spot number 10 in this ranking video, so I do want people to pay attention to that, because I do think with the new rankings you can absolutely interchange everybody from 2nd to 4th, and I also do think that you can replace the spot number 10th with a handful of other champions. But ultimately, and here is the big disclaimer, these lists are a mixture of my own opinions as well as current in-game trends. In these series of lists, I do prioritize competitive game modes, which primarily would be Alliance War and Battlegrounds. And if I would have to put, let's say, a moderate point system in place there, then you get, let's say, a third of potential points for how well you do in Heavy Q and Act 6 and Act 7 and all that other stuff. And you do get about a third of the points for Alliance War and about a third of the points for Battlegrounds, because whether you like it or not, Battlegrounds is kind of the new top game mode for the vast majority of the players. And also, ultimately, if these champions are good enough to be used in the most competitive scenarios, then they are more than likely going to be good enough to smash through all the casual content. What I am trying to say is, when you comes to choosing which champions to rank up, if you have a choice to make but between somebody that does great in story content but perhaps need a full synergy team, opposed to somebody that does great in story content and does great in Battlegrounds and does great in Alliance War, to me, that, you know, obviously one champion is significantly more valuable than the other one. Ultimately, this is game. You are obviously each of your own people. You have your own heads on your shoulders. You should rank the champions that you enjoy and you like, and the champions that can get the job done for you. We all have different tendencies, playstyles, interests, mastery setups, preferences. All that stuff matters when taking champions up. But as I said, in these specific ranking videos, I will largely be focusing on the competitive game modes, not ignoring the other aspects of the game. However, they do not have as much of a sway as they have had in past. And therefore, we do need to look at the old ranking, because it will be changed quite significantly. And now we have top Hercules, second was CGR, third was Hyperion, fourth was Corvus, fifth was Null, sixth was King Groot. Then we had a shared Venom and Venompool ranking, Angela, Hulkling, and Cersei. Hulkling was as low because he was brand new champion. I was confident that he will make somewhere in the top 10 and he will be great. I just, was being a bit cautious because he was fresh out of the box and hardly anybody had a chance to use that guy. Now, all that said, I think we have covered the bases here. I think I'm safe from some immediate attacks. So let's get to the business. So Cosmic class, if I'm not mistaken, is still like the biggest class in the game by a margin, because they do have 45 champions and the rest of the classes at the moment have like 40 max, I believe, by the looks of it. Yes, so Cosmic class is still by far the biggest class in the entire game. And Cosmic class used to be relatively weak, and there were quite a lot of duds, and that is kind of a relic of the past. You can see quite a lot of champions in Cosmic class that are relatively unremarkable. But Kabam overall, through the course of last 2 years, well, more specifically last year, not as much as this year, they did improve quite a few Cosmic champions to a point where they are extremely competitive. And also then we obviously had new champion releases that did absolutely amazing. My apologies, I do have something a bit on my glasses because I was doing some house construction work type of thing. So let me just clear them up and let's get back to the business. So the champions that unfortunately do not make the list, but I still think are awesome and do have their value, will be Venompool. Venompool definitely is a champion that in right situations can be extremely potent. I think there was a Eternity of the Pain fight that absolutely did prove that. And likewise with Venom, these champions are very, very similar. And both of them have their kind of like strong sides and the things that one does that other doesn't do as well, necessarily speaking. But ultimately, you can interchange them for a lot of content. And they're awesome. They're great. They can get quite a lot of stuff done, and I can absolutely see why so many people like them. Similarly is Vision Arcus. Vision Arcus, again, in specific niche scenarios, can be extremely potent champion. He's one of those champions that never kind of took off, but I can always absolutely respect somebody ranking him up early or relying on him and using him, because he does have a very, very cool kit. I just wish that when he was bugged, Kabam left him as is, because then you could have pretty much 100% uptime on the armor shatter, because you could keep stacking armor breaks whilst the opponent was armor shattered, and that resulted in a fairly significant increase in his damage output as well. Then we have OG Thor, that I personally still absolutely love. I actually took mine recently to rank 200, and it looks like the next season he's going to be quite a champion to use in Battlegrounds as well. And then we have, again, some niche specialty champions that you do find their value primarily on defense, like Terax or Super Skrull. Obviously, they are not in the top 10 list. Neither is Red Goblin. Again, that can be quite interesting. Proxima is quite a unique character to have. We have Odin and Nova. Neither one of these two did make the top 10 list, but there will be a very, very good argument for Odin taking spot number 10. I'm going to go over that a bit more in detail, but Nova is quite cool. Then obviously we have Medusa, Icarus. All of these champions are great. They're just a tiny bit short, in my opinion. And CMM also has largely kind of fallen off the map for a while. Right, so let's get to spot number 10. And the other two champions that I think could easily be replaced, because I do value all three of these champions approximately the same. And that is Odin, is one of the champions that I didn't include, and Angela. I think either one of those two, if you want to feel outraged that I don't enjoy Angela as much as I should, or I'm not valuing Odin as much as I should, you can easily replace them. But at the moment, I'm going to give spot number 10 to Silver Surfer. I do think Silver Surfer has been a bit of a late bloomer. I do think that when he was released, it was extremely easy to be disappointed in his kit. But I also think that it's partially because a lot of the champions that didn't exist in the game at the time when he was released came out later that he's great against. And then on top of it, a lot of the nodes that he does extremely well, like the energy adoption nodes that he can completely cheese and so on and so forth, also didn't exist or weren't used as wildly. And ultimately the game mode where he is at his best, I would say, also didn't exist, which was Battlegrounds. So all of those things combined, we have an absolute prestige menace, right? That is also, and this is purely personal conversation here, he is one of my most used rank 4s now. At this point, I do have 30 rank 4s, and he's still one of those who I use, I would say, top 5 most often, because he is perfect for a lot of paths in AQ. Specifically, I run him for path 7 in sector 1, and then I can use him for every single fight, which are both path 8 in section 2 and section 3. So he is my most hard-working Alliance Quest champion. And on top of that, he has gained immense popularity in Battlegrounds. Now, this month's metas might not have necessarily been the best for him, but even though, like, you know, with Rich Get Richer and stuff like that, he still performed excitingly well. And the cool thing is, he does take a lot of matchups that are, you know, quite hard and quite relevant. Now, the place where he is least represented is Alliance War. If he was a frequent Alliance War champion, you know, he would likely be even higher on this list, in my opinion. But Alliance War, we do see him on defense still, because he does have the ability to proc those armors or, you know, catch people with his level 2 and whatnot. But we don't really see him at all Alliance War high tiers offensively. However, Battlegrounds, questing content, NAQ, stuff like that, we definitely do see him getting used more and more and more. And I can honestly say that he's not just a prestige champion. He's a champion that I ranked up quite early. I was hesitant to rank up my Silver Surfer because, you know, the whole prestige champion thing and stigma. but he's been serving me extremely well, and definitely in Battlegrounds, definitely in Alliance Quest. So ultimately, and also he's extremely compatible with a whole bunch of new cosmic nodes that require either armor breaks or proccing furies and having buffs and things like that. So he just works with a whole bunch of that new release stuff too. As I said, I'm sure that there will be people screaming at me like there are after every single list that I release. It's kind of funny. I always look forward to making these videos, but then about 3 videos in, I remember how nasty people can be. And then I don't look forward to finishing the series nowhere near as much as I thought I would, because, I have had at least 8 unsubscribe for this garbage opinions and stuff like that. So as I said, if you really are that fussed about Angela being in top 10, you can substitute that, or Odin, I think, is also a solid substitute there for the 10th spot. And I, however, value more with Silver Surfer does, and I use Silver Surfer more personally, much more than Odin and Angela, and I also see most of the top tier players do the same. So that's why Surfer is on that list. Let's go to spot number 9, and that is going to go to King Groot. Now, King Groot has taken a slight backseat, and that's no fault of his own. King Groot is still an absolute sustainability machine that does a ton of awesome things. The reason why he is taking some backseat is, largely just because of how busted some of the new cosmic releases have been, and they substitute using him. Because, let's say, I often do bring in King Groot, let's say, for Alliance Quest, but I'd rather use somebody else that I brought in if I can get away with it, and then I use King Groot if I have scuffed up my fights and I just need, to save items. Because he will get so many fights done, he's just going to take slightly longer. With the buff, his damage output has been improved, definitely. And especially when synergized, but unsynergized, he does not necessarily have the greatest damage output, especially when you compare him with some of the cosmic powerhouses. However, there is an incredible amount of utility in his kit. His shrug off abilities, bleed immune, his regeneration, access to permanent armor breaks, and the whole 10 of them. There's also shutting off opponents' healing, access to poisons, access to plenty of fury buffs, immunity to power modification at him, and so on and so forth. So all that does come out in very effective package. Again, it's not necessarily always going to be the fastest, but obviously he also has his defensive prowess, which does make sure that he does see plenty of defensive play in Battlegrounds, plenty of defensive play in Alliance War, and also some offensive uses in Battlegrounds. Like, you can quite easily still manage to take down Killmongers with him, some of the robots who are ever present. And in general, if in a pinch, he definitely is, one of those champions where you can turn around and throw on offense and do better than most people think you would. But ultimately, he's kind of like the sustainability machine where you can go from 10% to full health in like one moderately long fight. So I do think he deserves his 9th spot. I do think he's absolutely amazing. I do think he is still a very relevant champion in MCOC. Spot number 8 at the moment is going to go to Cersei. And Cersei, again, had quite a slow start in this game. She didn't necessarily shine as much. And obviously, kind of has something to do with a fairly bland character as such. I think if all of the Cersei's kit would have been placed on some more popular champion that people were actually excited, than an Eternal that majority of the people have never heard of and looks like, I don't know, House of Dragon made or for the Team Greens or something like that, then she could have gained her popularity earlier. I do think, the visual aesthetics of Cersei are relatively bland, and that does matter at times. That definitely does matter. But despite all of that, she has basically gone from strength to strength to strength to a point where, unless you have a very dedicated, very special counter, she is one of the most annoying champions to go up against in Alliance Wars, in Battlegrounds, in story content, pretty much everywhere, because that glancing is insanely powerful. Especially also if she's awakened and then she starts gaining all the regen buffs. Obviously, I know that there's going to be some smart-ass comment, yeah, Longshot nukes her and stuff like that. Yeah, of course, there are counters. Tiger can get rid of her in like 20 seconds. But point remains, she's very, very potent defender, especially if opponent doesn't necessarily have the best counter. And then on top of it, I do still believe that her offensive uses are extremely underrated. Her damage output is much better than people realize. In longer form content, you can also regenerate like crazy. Then she does have access to, true damage and stuns and unblockable specials, and so on and so forth. And transmutation buffs themselves do not come without a value, because they do reduce the duration of quite few annoying damage or time effects, and heal block that can let her take some matchups where she's not necessarily ideal against, but she can do them well enough. But ultimately, we all know the true strength of that Cersei comes from glancing. The glancing is extremely strong ability, especially given that it's guaranteed. And with that, she can bypass a lot of annoying nodes, like kinetic transference, for example. That's extremely relevant right now on offense. And yeah, she can definitely put in a lot of work. So with all of that, definitely very capable champion that should not be overlooked, should not be underestimated. And again, she sees offensive and defensive use in Battlegrounds. She sees, defensive use in Alliance War primarily, and then also definitely have seen plenty of her across the rest of the content if need be as well. And then moving on, spot number 7. And here I think I might get some pushback for my spot number 7 pick, but I'm still going to go ahead with Gore. Because Gore is gaining popularity in quite fast order. I would like to think that I had something to do with it, at least a tiny bit, because I did end up taking my Gore up to rank 4 very, very early on when he was a brand new champion. And I'm not going to make, any false claims about it. I did it 100% because he is a potent defender for Alliance Wars, and I wanted to improve my Alliance War defense. However, as a result of doing so, I ended up using him a lot more, testing him out, different strategies, different rotations, and he is much, much, much more capable than people give him credit for, even in his current form, where you can basically nuke virtually anything in game with a couple of level 3s, which is not necessarily the quickest thing, but ultimately, it's his thing. Then also he has access to incredible amounts of damage over time effects. His current problem is obviously that he's quite stressful and hard to use, especially if he's not like max sig. And that is something that Kabam is addressing. They are significantly increasing his shadow magic buff duration from 20 to 30 seconds. So it's going to be much easier to keep up his shadow magic. And then on top of it, they're also increasing his undermine buff, which is where he gains a lot of his utility, which basically lets him completely ignore all of the auto block abilities in the game, because he's not directly countering the auto block, he's just going unblockable. And with that, he's going to be much more capable offensively than he already is, and most importantly, more user-friendly and low signature level friendly. Then on top of it, obviously, we need to talk about him being on defense, and he's just one of those champions where unless you do have a way to deal with his buffs and regeneration, he just doesn't die. If you fight strong enough Gore, and you don't have, let's say, Despair and plenty of debuffs or access to heal blocks and nullify abilities, he's unkillable. It's just fact right there. Because his healing gets more and more potent, the more health he loses, and it activates on virtually every hit, and there's just nothing you can really do about it. So he is 100% a champion that does require a specific defender to be dealt with. And then ultimately, one of the good things that speaks on behalf of Gore is the fact that he has access to nigh infinite amounts of buffs, even from the very start of the fight, and that lets him synergize extremely well with a whole bunch of cosmic nodes and cosmic abilities. Therefore, I do think we are going to see more of him in random challenge modes and in random Act 8 lanes and stuff like that. Ultimately, at the moment, he currently serves primarily as a defender for Alliance War and for Battlegrounds. We do see him being used offensively in Battlegrounds as well, and we do see him being used across the rest of the contest increasingly more, because he is a new champion that only people are getting into right now, and I'm super happy that he's getting the tune-up. So that's Gore. And now we're going to go with spot number 6. And this is going to be kind of like an important separation, I'd say. Spot number 6 is going to go to Null. And this is the last spot where, I would be quite open to switching champions about. I think anything that is in 6, 10 to 12 to 13, is debatable. I do think Null is ultimately somewhat more valuable than the champions that I mentioned before, because we have seen him around more. We do see him for alliance for defense, we do see him for alliance for offense, we do see him for abreast content and challenge modes and stuff like arena challenges and things like that. And we do obviously see him battlegrounds offensively and defensively as well. He is one of those champions where if you do want to use him competitively, you do have to commit, get him to SIG 200 or close to, but there are plenty of reasons why you would want to do so anyways. Ability to start the fight with 13 debuffs, especially in combination with Inequity Mastery, significantly gimping opponent's abilities, obviously is extremely potent. One of the coolest things about him is reduced degeneration damage and even more reduced bleed and poison damage. And then obviously he is extremely unique for a Cosmic Champion. Ability wise, he, in my opinion, much more closely resembles a Science Champion, because he pretty much has no buffs in his base kit. He does get, some buffs with his Awakened ability, but those are only there for a brief second. And then ultimately he's all about his debuffs, because without his debuffs, he's basically worthless. So that is sounding much more like Science Champion, especially if you also consider the fact that he isn't, a damage powerhouse off the start. Typically, you do want to ramp him up, and you do want to throw your level 1 in shorter fights, level 3 in longer fights, in order to get your damage going, which he has plenty of. I think a lot of people did fall in love with Null during the Karina Symbiote Challenge, which definitely was, eye-opener for quite a lot of people then, in my opinion. But since then, I think he has had a very stable kind of like platform where he goes again on alliance for defense, especially with some of the new nodes. He is one of the more popular bosses currently for Alliance 1. And also, obviously, he can be quite an annoying champ to go up against as a battlegrounds defender, and there's plenty of offensive utility too. I do like a lot, his armor break mechanics and how he builds his damage, also that instant degen and those instant bleeds. The things that I don't necessarily enjoy as much about him is that only symbiote attacks bypass their weight, so in quite a few scenarios it's relatively tricky to use him as an evade or auto block counter. And obviously, I wish there was a way how you could start your corruption earlier, but ultimately, all things combined, I think he's extremely well balanced. I think he's a champion who has a place, who has a meaning, who has a role in this game, has both offensive and defensive qualities in him. Needs more or less specific situation to shine at his best. He's not necessarily your daily questing champion type of character, but at the same time, not everybody has to be, and he has showed that he does more than enough to justify his spot on this list as spot number 6 champion. And that is also one of the reasons why he is as high, because he has been in the game for a while now. He has proved himself in all of the game modes, and might not be everybody's cup of tea, but I don't think many people will deny that he has plenty of uses in this game overall. So that's why Null takes spot number 6. Now, spot number 5 and upwards, I think, are champs at a different level. I do think that it's obvious. I don't need to necessarily hide who is going to take spot number 1. But I do think that everything in spot number 2 to 5 is relative. I think it does depend on preference. I do virtually value all of those champions the same or almost the same. And this is again one of those situations where no matter what order I arrange these champions in, somebody is not going to like it. So I was sitting at a sheet of paper here looking at those champions and trying to figure out the best arrangement for them. And it's just impossible. It really is, because everybody from 5 upwards in Cosmic. And that is a testament of how bonkers Cosmic class is. In other classes, we have clear 1, 2 best champions, something like that. In Cosmic class, we have like 5 champions that could easily fight for the top spot in virtually any of the other classes, in my opinion. And it looks low. When I play somebody in spot number 5, it almost looks as if I don't value those champions enough. And I'm sure there will be comments like that. Therefore, I do want to make sure that people do understand that I think it's almost a coin toss, or a split of a hair, in a sense. Which champion goes in 5th place, which champion goes in 2nd place. I personally, don't distinguish between them much at all in terms of quality. If somebody would ask me which champion do I rank up first, I'd probably answer whichever one you enjoy using most, because, quality-wise, there's just no bad decision. All of them are amazing. And I do have to be very careful there. And I do, again, want to make sure that people understand that something might look, to be in spot number 5, but I do value those champions a ton. And ultimately, spot number 5 is going to go to Hyperion. Hyperion's just one of those champions that has aged like fine wine, that has a ton of value everywhere where he goes. And he is still competing at the very highest levels of the game, despite coming out in 2016. 6 years ago, this champion was released. And he's still at the top of the game, and there's absolutely nothing that's been changed about him. And all of that utility comes from, insane amounts of power gain. So let's break it down. Is he useful and used for overall content, story, quest, and stuff like that? Absolutely, because he does fulfill the cosmic roles extremely well. Is he used for Alliance War? Yeah, he is, offensively and defensively. Is he used for Battlegrounds? Absolutely, offensively and defensively. So here we have a champion that covers all the most important game modes, all the most important places in the game, and does it with crazy versatility. Now, Hyperion has often, if not always, been one of those champions that is not necessarily the best counter. It's not necessarily the fastest option to do a fight. He has always been an option, one of the better options, but he didn't necessarily have that much where, he's an obvious first choice. And game mode like Battlegrounds has let him shine better than anybody else ever could, because in Battlegrounds it's all about doing the best you can with the champions that you have. And Hyperion is amazing. For instance, we have better counters to Killmonger, but he's going to be taking down the Killmonger extremely well. Like, we have better, faster counters to Nimrod, but he can nuke down that Nimrod without much problems. Like, we have better counters to, let's say, Toad, but he can nuke down Toad. And it's one of those things that's so valuable about Hyperion, where he just manages to make himself work, even when it seems like he shouldn't, even when it seems like he, wouldn't. And again, majority of it comes from just the insane amounts of free power that you get. Thus, you are able to basically just spam special attacks. If you really want, I bet you can do a fight without landing a single basic hit and just landing special attacks. Which again, coincidentally, is one of the reasons why he is a good Electro counter. You just spam your level 1s against Electro. First hit will make contact, so he'll take a tiny bit damage back, but, rest of the hits will not make contact, and most of the damage is going to come from Incinerates anyways. So, is he the best Electro counter in the game? Of course not. Is he a very good Electro counter? Yes. And, especially in a game mode like Battlegrounds, that's what matters. But that also matters in a ton of places in the game. He's kind of like a Swiss Army knife utility donkey type of character that has plenty of horsepower behind there and plenty of damage as well. And again, as I said, you can run him with Liquid Courage, without Liquid Courage as well, because he is immune. He does have healing in his kit. Obviously, ideally, you do run him without recoil, but you can if you want to run him with. And then also, ultimately, there are several different playstyles. He has access to a ton of Incinerates, ton of Armor Breaks, plenty of Furies, Regen if need be, and the Poison immunity as well is there. And it doesn't sound like necessarily the biggest toolkit, but it just works. It always has, and it continues to. No matter what new quests Kabam release, Hyperion finds plenty of use in them. Kabam release new game mode, Hyperion works. Kabam releases new Alliance War offensive and defensive tactics, Hyperion works. And again, as I said, I can absolutely even understand why there would be people who place him as the second best Cosmic. Because for every champion that I'm going to talk about in this video from this point forward, there is an argument to be made to be in spot number 2, spot number 5. But, you know, in this case, I chose to place him 5th, primarily because of that he's not necessarily the top or go-to option. Because the champions above are extremely, extremely, extremely versatile and work in a ton of situations as well. And they often are the top options. I understand that that is not the strongest line of argumentation to necessarily take him down to 5th, but this is what I chose to went with. Because there is no convincing argument why any one of these top 5 champions, you know, should be in spot number 5. Spot number 4. Spot number 4 is going to be Galen. And this is one of those things where Hulkling and Galen got released earlier this year. Both of them are brand new. And in my 2022 champion video, I kind of already explained the situation where I do think Hulkling is tiny bit better than Galen is. Not by much at all. Just slightly bit, just a smidge. And the reason for it is because Hulkling is kind of like more, I'd say, consistent. I'd say also likely holds more defensive value, even though Galen also has defensive value. But ultimately, Hulkling is kind of like more easy to operate. I would say often also less risky, but we'll get to that. Anyways, you can watch the 2022 ranking video to get in more in-depth comparison in between Hulkling and Galen. I do, however, believe that Galen is amazing addition, and he has already proved himself pretty much everywhere where it matters. He is great for a whole bunch of questing scenarios. He is not the greatest in kind of like long form content, and that has to be made very clear. He's not going to be the fastest Winter Soldier killer. He's not going to be fastest Abyss or Labyrinth of Legends killer and stuff like that, and stuff like Act 8, for instance. He'll work amazing where Cosmic Champions are meant to work, and if you have some nodes or abilities that let him ramp up quicker, he's going to be doing great. But, you know, he is capped at 200k on max detonation, which is also thereabouts the limit of the fights where you want to use Galen as one of your primary options. He can do stuff that's bigger, obviously, but then there are, you know, significantly better alternatives. I do think what gives Galen his match value, as he has, obviously, is that one detonation KO, even if opponents are nearly at full health, which enables him to take a ton of matchups where a Cosmic Champion in theory shouldn't. He's also quite a unique Cosmic character that Kabam had given Nullify immunity, which obviously make him much more potent against certain nodes, matchups, and scenarios like Power Snack or Buffet nodes and things like that. And if we look across the board, then he has, without a doubt, already 100% proved his value in the game. He functions great as a defender, both for Alliance War and Battlegrounds. And then, obviously, he's extremely capable as an Alliance War attacker. There are some lanes that he makes completely redundant to a point where opponents just don't place champions because Galen exists, or place champions that, you know, they wouldn't otherwise under any other circumstances. And the same thing goes for Alliance Quest. The thing that I like most about Galen, that he turns out to be amazing for a ton of random matchups. Like, for instance, he can do Dr. Doom extremely well. You know, just go to level 3 and then drop your level 2 or level 1 and you're going to finish up the fight. he does absolutely amazing against the Thing, because you can just, bypass the protection with that burst of damage and just nuke down a massive Thing. And there are a whole bunch of them where randomly Galen walks out and a champion dies, especially where you did not necessarily think that it could or might work. And then obviously we do need to talk about his immunity to the power manipulation, which is extremely potent. Access to a slight, regen to recover chip damage that can be quite, neat, helpful. It's not the most potent thing. I do like his access to incinerates a ton, because those incinerates, when you drop them whilst you're in harvest, are extremely potent, and they can also account for a significant amount of source of damage. The whole cosmic seed thing, I think, is only relevant now because of incursion zone 25 runs, because it is de facto the best strategy to do your zone 25 runs when you make a cosmic, let's say, Hercules, a Herald, and give them an infinite healing from Liquid Courage Double Edge. In like casual questing scenarios, I don't think that the whole Herald thing is as successful as APOC and his Horseman thing, and I don't think it plays major role in, majority of the places, nor I'm overly keen on the rest of the bonuses that he gives. I think the resistance to damaging debuffs is very good. The rest of the stuff is nice, but I don't think it's that great. And again, I don't think it's the most practical or useful ability. But it is still a positive. It is still a good thing to have. It is still, again, an ability that has found its place, and that's namely incursion runs, in order to juice up your Hercules. And then the rest of him, it's a kit that functions extremely well and is very unique and specific to Galen. The things that I do like is the fact that he gets his resistances, that's, taking less physical or energy damage as well if needed be. The fact that he has access to incredible amount of buffs extremely quickly and early on in the fight, which is something that a lot of Cosmic Champions are often required to have in order to function properly for some specific nodes. I do actually like his Awaken ability, and I do think that Awaken ability is what makes him fun or broken in many scenarios. Galen is a busted champion and well worth ranking up unawakened, but when you do awaken him and take him about to Sig 60 or so, you can absolutely cheese specific fights like Penny, or any fight that involves like Power Lock, something like that. One of my favorite cheese interactions at the moment is if I bring Galen to Alliance Quest. 2 of my first fights include Special Lock 1, which basically means that with Galen you just get to 1 bar of power, drop a heavy attack, and opponent dies. Because you immediately ramp up to 999 planetary mass. So there is quite a lot in his kit. There are a couple of things that I absolutely do not understand and make no sense, and I wonder why they did it with him. For instance, while Galen is in Harvest, he becomes stun immune and deals a burst of, up to 100 damage max. That damage, whenever you gain planetary mass, that damage is absolutely despicable. That damage could be multiplied by a factor of 10, and that ability would still be relatively irrelevant offensively. And even defensively, when it's this weak, it plays no meaning at all. Oh my god, Galen gained some planetary mass and I took 100 damage out of my 50,000 health pool. Just don't understand why it's there. But okay, fine, whatever. Ultimately though, I do think Galen is powerful. I do think he's here to stay. I do think he's one of those champions that's reshaping the contest. I do think that he will be popular for a quite long time to come. Also, ironically, people would ask me, which one do you prefer ranking first, like, to rank 4? I typically, again, as I said, say whichever one you enjoy most. But I do think that Galen needs the rank 4 more than, let's say, Hyperion or Hulkling or CGR or some of the other top Cosmic Champions, because whether Galen is capable of doing specific fights can easily depend on what is his max amount of burst damage at 999 planetary mass. And it's kind of like situation with Corvus that we used to have, and Corvus is another sad story that I'll talk about later, but I don't think he's in top 10 anymore. He does benefit from every single bit of that rank up, more so than many other Cosmic Champions. Right, let's move on. Spot number 3, and spot number 3 is another newcomer, and here was the biggest struggle that I had. Spot number 3 is going to go to Hulkling. I also wanted to keep Hulkling and Gallon together because they're quintessentially almost, identical in their ability, in my opinion. And the choice was to put Hulkling and Gallon as spots number 2 and 3, and then, I'm not hiding anything, CGR as spot number 4, or keep CGR as spot number 2 at the moment and put Hulkling as 3 and Gallon as 4. So you clearly see what I chose to go with, and Hulkling is top 3 Cosmic Champion. He's also obviously new, but this guy's just going from strength to strength to strength. And what I love most about him is that its effect, he's just about as simple as a character can come. Get to level 2 and use it. If you want bonus points, hit opponent's block slightly before you use your level 2. That's it. That's the best thing about a character. In time when we are getting these super complex champions with very specific rotations and whatnot, to have a champion that just level 2 them, be this great, be this effective, is awesome. Also, the fact that he doesn't rely on any of the damage over time effects or passives or things like that, it's great. It's just pure raw damage coming from that level 2. Hulkling obviously has proven himself already virtually everywhere. Defensively, he's one of the biggest nightmares to fight against from Cosmic class if you don't have a great counter. And again, just longshot him. It's like, yeah, of course you can just fucking longshot him, tiger him, wicken him, rinter him. Every champion has counters, so does him. But if you do not have a great counter, this can be a very, very tough fight, and most importantly, extremely punishing fight, where even parrying against him feels painful. And that indestructibility obviously completely disrupts the rhythm and can significantly gimp your damage. And he is a very, very big problem. I think my last death in Alliance War was to a null boss. I did 6 null bosses last season, died 1. And I think season before I died once was also against something else because I made a flat mistake. But Hulkling was the last champion to just destroy me in a fight. That was about 3 seasons ago now. Because in the last 2 Alliance War seasons, I have died only once each. One was a stupid misunderstanding, and I brought in the wrong champion, and that's a long story. And one was a null boss. But before that, Hulkling was the last champion to actually wreck me. And he is a very dangerous fight. When you make a mistake, it can just go so wrong so quickly. And then obviously offensively. Offensively, he does have so much to talk about. First of all, he has poison and shock immunity. Then he also is immune to power drain, steel burn, and also, ironically, reducing heal block duration by 2 seconds. Then he has slightly decreased combat power rate, but he makes up for it with his ability power gain. I like the fact that he gets extra attack for each unique buff he has, even if it's not from his own ability, so he synergizes extremely well with like Odin's pre-fights or plenty of nodes. And then obviously we have the whole Pierce thing, where he can hit like a truck through block. We have that AI manipulation aspect on his heavy attack. And then we have the massive level 2, which can give you 2 incredibly potent Furies that just nuke down opponents. But in his base, he's a very simple character. Just level 2 and Fury, right? But it just works. It just works. And I think everybody should want a Hulkling ranked up. I think if you don't have a Hulkling or Gallon for that matter, you should be trying to get one. And I think if you're not trying to get one, you're doing disservice to your account. I think he will be extremely relevant for a foreseeable future in MCOC. Because he's simple, easy to use, extremely effective, and works everywhere where it matters. And then spot number 2. Spot number 2 is going to go at CGR. And CGR, and again, full disclosure, it took a while for me to accept that CGR is doing as well as he is, because on paper, he shouldn't have been. On paper, CGR falls in every single trap that the previous champions don't. He relies on opponents to be able to be debuffed freely, for instance. If you can't place your armor breaks on opponent, CGR does nothing. So all of the armor break immune champions, he's not going to work. Let's say Galen and Hulkling will. He requires to gain his buffs freely, which, you know, is standard condition for most of the Cosmic Champions. But again, he doesn't have any protections against Nullify, something like that they have given, for instance, Galen now. And let's say Hercules can function relatively well without those buffs. And then on top of that, obviously, he requires you to be able to drop your combos freely, finishing, you know, 5-hit combos with lights and mediums and stuff like that, which again often is problem when dealing with auto-block characters, when dealing with miss mechanics, when dealing with evades, or so on and so forth. But despite all of those inherent weaknesses, he works in all of the most important places and game modes, and in a ton of, you know, critical matchups. And he just doesn't only work, he is one of those champions that you describe as the best option, or the go-to option, or by far the easiest option, and an absolute nuke fest. He's one of those champions people use as their daily questing champion because of his speed, potion farming champion because of his speed, and so many more things. So CGR is obviously primarily an offensive character. He represents very little to no defensive value. Initially, we did see him as an Alliance War defender here and there. Well, people got used to him, but I think at this point there's, you know, not much reason to place him on defense. At the same time, you know, offensively, he is so powerful that he's one of those champions that's kind of like an icon of MCOC at the moment. And that's understandable. You know, some of the damage output that he can put out is ridiculous. And the best thing about it is that it's fast. There are a lot of champions in this game that can have access to incredibly amazing amount of damage, but they need to get to their level 2. And by CGR standards, that's slow, because they don't have that massive power gain. So in effect, with CGR already to do a ton of damage to your opponent, only thing you need to do is basically parry heavy, drop 2 combos, and you are at level 2, which is significantly less work than virtually all other champions in the game, with potential exceptions Tigra. So the fact that he has that inherent speed advantage is one of the things that makes him as great. Obviously, then you have the option of giving him with some cosmic power boost and completely cheesing, you know, entire lanes of Alliance War. I quite literally have had Alliance Wars where I have had 6 or 7 fights, and all of them are done with just CGR, and every single one of them lasting like 30 seconds. And then obviously Battlegrounds, he doesn't necessarily work for every single meta, but if he works, he's one of those champions that will affect what you draft drastically, and, you know, pending whether you do have an appropriate matchup for him, can easily mean a guaranteed automatic win for you, because he is as fast as anything. Especially if you happen to be running recoil. I think in that case I saw a 16-second fight or something ridiculous like that with CGR. And that is CGR. Now again, I do understand if some people would want to place Hulkling or Galen above him, as, you know, arguably both of them have more defensive value, or they can work in specific different matchups where CGR couldn't. But then I also want to remind you, for instance, Archangel. I don't think there is much discussion that Archangel is a mutant top 3 champion. And Archangel doesn't work all the time. You know, opponents only need to be bleed immune, and Archangel is garbage. And that's kind of the same thing with CGR here. What matters is how well this champion works when there is a suitable matchup, and where those suitable matchups occur and how important those fights are. And CGR takes the important fights, the best of that category. He is the go-to option for a ton of fights. And ultimately, I do think he successfully manages to kind of squeeze in enough utility as well to answer some of the trickier fights like Korg, for instance, and him being able to have that regular playstyle with his first medium being in energy attack, and so on and so forth. So I do think Cosmic Ghost Rider for now retains his position. I do think it is very much worth keeping an eye on it, because it could very well be that CGR use is dropping and Hulkling and Gallon use is increasing, especially with more and more people acquiring these champions. So it is up for debate. It's not set in stone, but at the moment, this is where we are, and CGR is second place, in my opinion. And the first place, you know, we don't need to talk about it at length. First place champion is just stupid. There are a lot of people regretting, I think, in Kabam that he was released. And it's Hercules. He does it all. He's an incredible cheese option for Alliance Quest. In fact, he was my default Alliance Quest champion for a very, very long time until I kind of got bored for it, but he still works incredibly well. And you can just play entire fights with Hercules being basically completely unblockable and immortal if you're aggressive enough. Then he works for Alliance War offense. He works not as great as some others. CGI is better for Alliance War, but he still is present and he does work. And then he works obviously for Battlegrounds as a very, very high damage output character. And that is despite him technically being a ramp-up character. Like, if you want to make a great ramp-up character, this is how you do it. You make sure that the ramp-up character can achieve his max damage early on in the very first fight that you use, and then just make it easier for the next fights. And somehow, as a ramp-up champion, he's still capable of putting out insane amounts of damage in like short, relatively to medium bursty fights. And then obviously when he's ramped up, it's just ridiculous. Ultimately, there is a very, very good argument to be made that he is the best champion on the game. There's also an argument to be made that he is the champion for lazy people. It's like, this champion inflicts poison, who cares? I'm just going to finish off whilst I'm immortal. It's like, I take a burst of damage back, who cares? I think the best testament of how broken Hercules is just incursions, where you go up against like a million health bolts. Obviously, you do get incredible, damage increase from your hacks and things like that. But the most important fact is that you just ignore about 85% of the nodes. It's like, Biohazard, whatever. I'll just blitz through with Hercules being immortal. It's definitely the laziest way. Also, ironically, probably the easiest. It's kind of like playing with cheats. Hercules almost reminds you of that, god tier character on the old games that you couldn't acquire unless you completed the entire game already or entered some sort of cheat code, and that has like all the stats maxed. That is Hercules. You can be about as lazy as you want, and the best thing about him is, even if you do screw up, just give him a 20% revive. Carry on. And the same thing in incursions. Even if you do screw up with him in incursions, unlike most other champions, you don't need to worry about healing him. Especially with, first of all, he heals himself from Liquid Courage Double Edge, especially if you put on some Herald ability on him, then he heals like a machine. But even if he doesn't, just play with your immortality. Save yourself units for the heal potion and just blitz through with that. He's stupidly good. And here's the thing. I understand why some people are not the biggest fan of Hercules. Not every champion's going to be everybody's, cup of tea. He's not my favorite champion. He's not the champion that, I look forward to using and things like that. But there's just no argument that he's the best. It just makes this game much easier. Much cheaper. He allows you not to pay attention to a ton of things. Allows you not to care about a ton of abilities and nodes and things like that. And he's broken. I think at the moment, in kind of like high tier scenarios, he's the closest thing that we have to an absolutely bonkers character. with how trivial he makes a lot of stuff. I think you can pretty much bring in only Hercules on like Act 8.1 and just like cheese through it all, if you really wanted to. You'd be robbing yourself of, enjoying the experience and, learning the interactions and stuff like that. But I'm quite sure that you could get vast majority of 8.1 explored with just Hercules. I'm quite sure that you get a vast majority of Act 7 explored with just Hercules. And a handful of revise. And obviously, again, he is present in Battlegrounds. He's present everywhere else. I think he's the best champion in the game. Period. Spoiler for the next video. But here we are. Hercules, son of Zeus. Allegedly. Right. So, the new ranking list as follows. Hercules, CGR, Hulkling, Galen, Hyperion, Null, Gore, Cersei, King Root, Surfer, and screw you haters. Anyways, as I said, I do think that you can swap Surfer for Angela or Odin. I think both of those champions deserve to be in discussion. And then I do think you can swap around 2nd to 5th place pretty much as you please. Lastly, I don't think Corvus is in top 10 anymore. Corvus is not getting wildly used for much anymore. You can occasionally see him in Alliance Wars, and that's about it. He has lost majority of his following, I would say. And I would rank up every single one of these 10 champions before I rank up Corvus. At the moment in the game. So I don't think Corvus is in top 10. Just to address that one. But yeah, other than that, I do think that Angela and Odin are very viable champions to discuss for spot number 10. And I do think that spot number 5 to 2 is extremely easily interchangeable. But ultimately, this is what I think of Cosmic Class. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I will catch you guys later. See ya. Hello there guys, and welcome back to the channel. So we have all the information about